Montana Territory, late spring of 1879, the Stagecoach never made it to Deer Lodge. The wheels had caught too fast on the edge of a rain-slick ridge, and in one terrible lurch, the coach had pitched over the side. The driver was thrown. The horses screamed and vanished. And somewhere in the tangled wreckage of wood, canvas, and broken trunks, a young woman lay still beneath the open sky. Quinn Farrow had been riding fence when he saw the dust cloud twist then vanish. He turned his gelding Flint hard toward the rise. By the time he reached the ridge, the wind carried the scent of splintered wood and blood. "Easy, boy," he muttered, dismounting. He peered down the steep ravine, there. The coach lay twisted against a stand of pines, its front axle cracked like a wishbone, one wheel still spun lazily. And sprawled just beyond the wreckage was a figure in a pale blue dress, unmoving. Quinn moved fast, sliding and skidding down the slope. When he reached her, his knees hit the dirt beside her shoulder. She was breathing. Barely. Her face was scraped, temple bloodied, and her right arm bent wrong. One boot was missing. Her dark hair had come loose, tangled with pine needles and dirt, but she was alive. Quinn touched 2 fingers to her neck, steadying his own breath. Then he looked at her again. Her mouth was parted like she had been mid-sentence. Her skin was pale beneath the bruises. She was maybe 22, 23. He pressed his hand gently against her ribs and felt the rise of breath. "You're all right," he said, though she could not hear him. "You hold on." He wrapped her in his coat, lifted her carefully, and started the climb back up the ravine. Flint waited at the top, reins dragging. Quinn got her across the saddle in front of him and rode hard, ignoring the storm clouds rolling in from the north. He did not stop until he reached his cabin, a 2-room place tucked close to the Bitterroots, an hour's ride from the nearest road. He pushed open the door with his shoulder and carried her inside. Quinn laid her on the cot by the fire, stoked it high, and gathered water. He cleaned her wounds, splinted her arm, and wrapped it in cloth. She stirred once, breathing hard, her brow furrowing. He murmured gently, "You're safe now. I've got you." It was nearly morning when she opened her eyes. She blinked at the low ceiling, the wooden beams above her, then at the man sitting beside the fire, tall, broad-shouldered, dark blonde hair curling at the edges of his collar. His shirt was dusty, sleeves rolled. He looked up when he sensed her stirring. "Hey," he said quietly. "You're awake," she licked her lips, then winced. "Where? You were in a wreck. I found you in the ravine, brought you here. You've been out almost a full day." Her eyes narrowed as she searched his face. "Who are you?" "Quinn Farrow," he said, setting the kettle aside. "This is my place." "You are safe here," she swallowed thickly. I am Galina Prescott. I was on my way to Butte to stay with my uncle. He was expecting me." "Well, Miss Prescott," he said, his voice low and steady, "that coach never made it to Butte." Her throat tightened. "The driver, dead," Quinn said softly. "You were the only one I found breathing." She closed her eyes briefly and her lashes trembled. He did not look away. After a long silence, she said, "Thank you for not leaving me there." He nodded. "You need rest." "I will ride to town tomorrow. Send word to your uncle." Galina opened her eyes again. "You could have left me." "I do not do that," he said simply. In the days that followed, Quinn cared for her without hesitation. He cooked broth, changed bandages, and helped her sit up when the pain dulled. She watched him with quiet eyes, his movements careful, his words few but kind. By the 4th day, she could sit near the fire while he worked outside. He had brought her a chair and a blanket. She watched through the open door as he chopped, Wood's strong arms swinging the axe, sweat darkening his shirt, jaw set in focus. "You are not much for talking," she said when he came back in, wiping his brow. "No need to fill silence," he said with a shrug. Galina smiled faintly. "Still. I think I prefer this to the city." He paused, met her eyes. "You from back east, Chicago. I was raised there. My parents passed last winter. I had no one and my uncle offered me a place. Guess I never made it." "You did now," Quinn said. She looked at him longer this time. "You live here alone," he nodded. "Left Texas years back. Was not much for crowds. The land is quiet here." Galina studied the fire. "It is quiet, but not lonely." That night she woke to a storm. Rain lashed the roof and thunder cracked close. She sat up fast, breath short, heart racing. The door creaked open. Quinn stood there, lantern in hand, eyes searching her face. "You all right?" she exhaled slowly. Storms, she said, voice shaking. They scare me. He crossed the room, set the lantern down, and crouched beside her. You are safe here, he said again. I will keep you safe. She stared at him, eyes wide. Why do you care? He hesitated, then said, because the world has taken too much from you already, and because no one should be left alone in a ravine or in fear. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached out and touched his hand. It was a small gesture, but his fingers curled around hers. The storm passed by morning, and when the sun broke through the clouds, Galina stepped outside with his help and looked out over the green valley. The air smelled like pine and rain. She turned to him. You said you would send word to my uncle, he nodded. I did. A rider passed through yesterday. He will make it to Butte by tomorrow. She hesitated. Then I suppose I will be leaving soon. Quinn looked away, jaw tight. If that is what you want. Galina reached for his hand again. I do not know yet. He looked down at their joined hands. You are not a burden here, Galina, not to me. She smiled, soft and certain. I did not think I was. And for the first time, Quinn smiled back. The wind had turned dry by the following afternoon, tugging at the edges of Galina's borrowed shawl as she leaned against the porch post. Her splinted arm rested in a sling fashioned from one of Quinn's worn linen shirts. She kept her eyes on the tree line, where the shadows stretched long and gold across the grass. Quinn was mending the corral gate, his movements efficient, the hammer's rhythm steady. With her hearing sharper, now no longer dulled by pain, she noticed how he worked without wasted motion, how he paused now and again to check the grain of the wood against the light. She cleared her throat. How long have you had this land? 6 years, he said, not looking up. Bought it from a man headed to Idaho. He didn't have the patience for cold winters. And you do, he shrugged. The cold's honest, doesn't pretend it won't come. Galina stepped down onto the packed dirt, careful not to jar her shoulder. You speak like someone who's been lied to a lot. He stopped hammering. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he straightened, wiping his hands on the back of his trousers. Most folks have been lied to, he said finally. I just decided I'd rather listen to trees than people. She lowered her gaze toward the worn tips of her boots. I was promised a warm house and a chance to help my uncle's wife teach at the school in Butte. I wrote letters for months. He never answered a single one. Quinn's brow furrowed. He knew you were coming. He paid for the fare. That much he did. She let out a breath. But I don't think he ever meant for me to arrive. Quinn stepped closer, his voice quieter now. You think he meant to leave you out there, I think, she said, lifting her chin. Some people find it easier to forget anyone who needs them. He didn't touch her, didn't say he was sorry. Instead, he watched her with a stillness that felt like shelter. Then he nodded toward the cabin. Come sit. I made coffee earlier. Still warm. Inside, the kettle sat beside the stove, and the scent of roasted beans lingered in the air, earthy, strong, grounding. He poured her a cup without asking and set it on the table between them. She curled her good hand around it. You always this quiet? Quinn leaned against the far wall, arms crossed loosely. I listen more than I talk. Doesn't mean I'm not thinking. She took a sip, then glanced at him over the rim. What are you thinking now, that you're not in a hurry to go? She studied the grain of the table. I don't have anywhere else to be. Silence stretched again, this time not empty but filled with unsaid things. The fire cracked once in the hearth. Outside, a pair of birds called back and forth from the trees. Galina set the cup down. When I was little, I used to pretend I lived out west. I'd read aloud from my father's newspapers, the ones with stories about ranchers and cattle drives. I thought it must be a place where people made their own lives. Quinn's voice was low. It is, but it takes work, and it takes staying. I think I could stay, she said, not looking at him. If there's reason enough. He crossed the room slowly, his boots soft on the wood. When he stopped beside her, she tilted her head back to meet his gaze. I don't know how to say things soft, he said, but I'd like it if you did. Her breath caught. Stay, he nodded once. You could have the room. I'd sleep out here, until you wanted something else. She didn't answer right away, but she reached for his hand, the same one she'd touched the night of the storm. This time she held it longer. I don't need the whole room. He searched her face, and something in his expression shifted, something cautious, loosening. You sure? Galina's fingers tightened around his. I'm sure. And though neither of them smiled, the quiet between them warmed. The wind moved around the cabin like a sigh, and the light through the window turned the walls amber. That night, she helped him prepare supper with her left hand awkward, but determined. He passed her the knife, and she peeled potatoes while he salted the beans. They didn't talk much, but they didn't need to. Her presence filled the space like something long missing had returned. Later, when the fire burned low, Quinn brought out a tin box from beneath the floorboards. Inside were clippings, letters, and a faded photograph of a woman with the same dark eyes as his. "She was my sister," he said, offering the picture. "Drowned in a river near Austin. I couldn't bring myself to stay after that." Galina traced the edge of the paper. "You don't have to explain." "I want to," he said. "You should know what came before." She looked up at him across the firelight. "So should you." He waited. "My mother was Russian. She taught me how to write poems even when the city stank of coal smoke. My father sold books. I don't know if they'd understand why I'm here, but I think they'd be glad I lived." Quinn nodded, slow. "You are living, right here, right now." And when she reached for his hand again, he didn't hesitate. He laced his fingers with hers and held on. The morning air held the scent of last night's ash and the sharp green of the surrounding pines. Galina stood barefoot on the cabin's back stoop, her right arm still bound in its sling, her left hand curled around a tin mug of barley tea. Quinn was already outside. She'd heard the barn door open before first light, but he hadn't left the property. She watched him now from the edge of the porch as he moved through the field behind the corral, checking fence posts. He paused to adjust one, then looked back toward her just once before returning to his work. When he returned, his boots were damp with dew and his shirt clung to his back from the walk uphill. "You're up early," he said, taking the mug she offered. "I heard the owls stop calling." Figured the sun would follow soon enough. She stepped down beside him and looked toward the ridge. "There's something about the quiet here that wakes a different part of me." He took a slow sip. "That bad or good? I'm not sure yet," she said. "But I don't want to go back to what I was before." His jaw shifted slightly. "What were you before?" "Someone who always tried not to take up too much space," she said without hesitation. "In Chicago, you learn quickly how to disappear in a crowd. Here, there's nowhere to hide." Quinn nodded, resting against the porch railing. "I think you were always meant to be seen." Her eyes found his. "You don't say things unless you mean them, do you?" "No reason to waste breath," he said. A hawk circled high above the slope. They watched it in silence before Galina finally turned back toward the cabin. "I want to help," she said. "I can't use my right arm much yet, but I can read, write, keep books if you keep animals, even so a little. I've got a few ledgers in a crate. My penmanship's nothing to boast about." "Then I'll write it clean," she said. "Start this afternoon." He considered her for a beat. "You don't owe me labor." "I know," she said. "But work makes a place feel like it's mine, too." That afternoon, Galina cleared a space on the table and laid out a blank sheet of paper next to Quinn's ledger. She dipped the pen carefully and began copying his scrawled numbers into neat columns. He watched her from the doorway, his hat in one hand, his eyes unreadable. "How'd you learn to keep accounts?" he asked. "My father taught me. He ran a used book stall and I kept track of every purchase." He said numbers were just stories with different letters. Quinn stepped inside, setting his hat on the hook. "I like that," she glanced up. "You ever thought of expanding? You've got grazing land beyond the ridge. Cattle take company." "I've been short on that." "Well," she said, dipping the pen again, "you're not anymore." The days rounded out with a rhythm that felt more chosen than accidental. Galina spent mornings at the table, her pen steady, her eyes scanning figures while Quinn came and went with the sun. In the evenings, they sat on the porch, sometimes with nothing but the sound of insects and the occasional lowing of a neighbor's steer from beyond the trees. One evening, she brought out a book from her satchel, the only one that had survived the wreck, its corners scorched and pages watermarked but legible still. She opened it with care and held it out. "I used to read aloud to my mother," she said. "Would you mind hearing a little?" "I'd like that," he said. Her voice was soft at first, shaped by the steady rhythm of ink on paper. Quinn sat on the step below her, his hands loosely clasped, his attention full. When she finished the chapter, she closed the book and sat still for a long moment. "I miss the sound of someone listening," she said. I miss the sound of someone speaking, he answered. The kind that's meant. She set the book aside. Do you ever leave here? Only when I have to. Would you ever go just to see something new? He looked up at her. Depends who's asking. Galina leaned forward, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of his shoulder. Then maybe I'll ask again in time. She stood and stepped inside, leaving the door open behind her. Quinn remained on the step, unmoving, his shoulders squared and his eyes lingering on the place where her hand had been. A little later, when he joined her inside, he found her seated at the table, a pot of stew warming on the stove and 2 bowls already set. You know, she said without turning, this cabin was meant for more than one. He didn't answer at first, just stepped closer, took the ladle from her hand and filled both bowls. I know, he said softly. That night, as the fire faded and the shadows climbed higher along the walls, Galina watched Quinn from across the room. His eyes were closed, his breathing even. She sat on the edge of her cot, her feet bare against the worn floorboards. Quinn, she said quietly. He opened his eyes and turned toward her. I'm not afraid anymore. He didn't speak, but his hand reached out. She crossed the floor without hesitation and settled beside him. The cot dipped under their combined weight, and the room held a hush that neither feared to break. When she laid her head against his shoulder, he rested his hand gently at the bend of her back. Neither said another word. They didn't need to. The creek behind the cabin ran stronger with the snowmelt, its voice louder as June deepened. By then, Galina had taken to walking its banks in the late mornings, her sling gone, her gait more sure with each passing day. Wildflowers peppered the rise above the water-yellow arnica, blue commas, and she gathered them slowly, trailing her fingers through their soft petals before slipping them into the basket over her arm. She didn't speak much during those walks. But Quinn always noticed when she returned with fresh mud on her boots and a clearer look in her eyes. One evening, just after supper, she set a small jar on the table between them. Inside floated a thick salve, pale and fragrant. For the burns on your knuckles, she said. You keep scraping them on the stove door. He looked at his hands, then at the jar. What's in it? Beeswax, pine resin, and wild rose. I boiled the roots down myself. My mother taught me how to make it. Quinn turned the jar in his hand, then met her gaze. I'll use it. Galina dipped a cloth into the basin and began wiping the table, her movements slow. I had a dream last night. Quinn waited. I was back in my uncle's house, she went on. Only it wasn't his house, it was mine, but everything felt hollow. All the furniture was too clean, and every door opened into a room with nothing inside. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. What did you do? I walked into the kitchen and opened the oven, and there you were, sitting inside like it was a chair. You said you looking for something warm or just familiar, he blinked. That sounds like a strange dream, she smiled faintly. It was, but when I woke, I wasn't frightened, I just felt. Certain? Of what? That I belong here. Quinn stood and crossed to the stove, where he reached for a small tin box from the shelf above. He returned to the table and opened it between them, revealing a silver chain and a carved wooden circle the size of a thumbprint. It was my ma's, he said. She wore it every Sunday, even when there weren't services. Galina touched the smooth carving. What's it mean? She said it was a promise. One circle, no end. He paused. I've kept it all these years, didn't know why until now. She looked up at him then, her eyes steady. You want me to wear it, if you want to. Galina lifted the chain and fastened it herself without another word. When it settled against her collarbone, her fingers lingered there. I'll wear it every day. The next morning, Quinn brought 2 milk goats back from the neighboring homestead. He led them by rope, the smaller one dragging her feet in protest. Galina watched from the porch, her arms crossed. They look miserable, she said. They'll settle, just need time to learn the routine. As the sun climbed, they worked together building a small pen beside the barn. Galina passed him tools, held steady the planks he nailed in place. When the last board was up, she leaned on the fence and watched the goats nose cautiously at the ground. I never imagined I'd be this content watching animals eat weeds. Quinn smiled with his eyes. It's a good kind of quiet. That night, she braided her hair by the fire while he sharpened the drawknife. The scent of oil and wood filled the room, and neither of them rushed the evening. When the fire burned down low, Galina stood, crossed to his chair and reached for his hand. "Come outside with me." He followed her into the night air where the stars hung low and bright over the trees. She didn't speak until they reached the edge of the pasture. "I want to build something here, not just live in what you've made." He turned toward her fully. "What do you have in mind?" "A room with windows on every side. A place to read and dry herbs. A table for maps and paper. We could build it behind the cabin near the creek. I'll help with every board." Quinn's voice was quiet. "You see yourself here for good?" Galina reached for his shirt front, resting her hands there. "I stopped waiting for permission to want something. I want you, and I want this place, and I want to make it mine in the way that means I never have to leave it." He stepped closer slowly until her forehead brushed his chest. His arms came around her, sure and steady. "You've got all of it now," he said. "Me too." They stood like that a long time, the crickets loud in the grass and the scent of sweet clover rising from the field. The stars above them didn't move, but something inside both of them did a shift, quiet and complete. When they walked back to the cabin, hand in hand, the lantern still burned low in the window. Their shadows passed through its light, and neither of them let go. By late July, the heat had settled low and steady across the land, and the creek behind the cabin ran slower now, hushed beneath the weight of dust and sun. The goats grazed lazily in the shade of the pines, and bees made work of the wild clover that had crept up along the fence line. Quinn had started splitting cedar for the new walls Galina had asked for, and she painted the boards with a mix of linseed oil and vinegar to keep the insects off. Their hands bore the marks of building splinters, tar stains, dried scrapes, but neither complained. Quinn finished anchoring the last roof beam just before dusk. He climbed down from the ladder and stepped back, wiping the sweat from his brow. "You didn't say you were good with a fro," Galina said, surveying the clean lines of the joinery. "I didn't know I was." "Just guessed." She nodded, brushing sawdust from her skirt. "It's solid. This place won't shift in wind. It'll hold," he said. They stood for a moment in the golden hush, looking at what they'd made. The windows faced all directions, just as she'd asked. Inside, the walls were bare for now, but the light poured in like it had been waiting. Galina stepped through the open doorway. "I want a table here, long enough for both of us to sit at. I'll write. You can carve or sketch your pasture lines or just drink coffee beside me. I'll make it," he said. "From the alder down by the bend." The next morning, they hitched the wagon and rode into Deer Lodge for supplies. It was the first time either of them had left the land together. The general store's bell rang sharp when they entered, and Galina's steps slowed as eyes turned. She lifted her chin, steady, and Quinn stayed close but didn't shield her. "Morning," she said to the clerk, placing a folded list on the counter. The man glanced from her to Quinn. "You the folks up near Bitterroot Pass?" "That's right," Quinn said. The clerk nodded once. "Heard you built something new." Galina smiled slightly. "Just big enough to hold a future." They left with sacks of flour, a box of nails, a bundle of linen, and a small cast iron kettle she'd admired in the window. As they loaded the wagon, a boy no older than 12 lingered near the back wheel, watching. "You two married?" he asked. Galina glanced at Quinn, then back at the boy. "Not yet," the boy nodded. "You will be." They rode home with the sun low against their backs. On the trail, Quinn's hand found hers on the seat between them. "Do you want that?" he asked. She didn't look away from the road. "Yes. I've wanted it since the day you told me I wasn't a burden." He didn't speak then. Just squeezed her fingers once and let the silence stretch. That night, Galina laid a folded cloth on the table and unwrapped a silver ring thin-banded, plain without stone. "My mother gave it to me when I turned 16, she said. Said to keep it until I could offer it honestly." Quinn turned the ring over in his palm. "You offering it now, to you?" He looked across the table at her. "Then I'll wear it. For as long as you want me." "I intend to want you all my days," she said. They married under the aspens behind the cabin, just the two of them, with the creek whispering nearby and a pair of meadowlarks calling from the ridge. Galina wore a dress she'd sewn from undyed muslin, and Quinn had cleaned his boots until the leather gleamed. He spoke his promise first, slow and even, eyes never leaving hers. Then she spoke hers, voice certain, hands steady. Afterward, They shared bread and dried berries beneath the trees and watched the wind move through the tall grass. By the first snow, the room they'd built together was filled. Galina's papers lay neatly stacked beside a thick jar of ink. Herbs hung drying from the rafters' coltsfoot, yarrow, goldenrod, and the alder table stretched the full length of the south wall. On its surface sat a carved box Quinn had made, filled with lengths of twine, chalk, and a small wooden scoop. They spent their evenings there now, sipping tea by the stove while the wind curled against the windows. Sometimes she read aloud. Other nights, he drew rough sketches of the goats or the slope of the ridge. They didn't always speak, but when they did, it was with the ease of people who'd built something strong between them. In the spring that followed, they planted a garden: potatoes, turnips, beets, and beans. Galina lined the rows with smooth river stones, and Quinn built a gate that latched without sound. By summer, the cabin walls were thick with green vines, and the goats had tripled. Word spread slowly of the woman near Bitterroot Pass who knew how to mend a fever and set bone without flinching. Folks began to ride out, one or two at a time, asking for help or offering trade. Galina never turned anyone away. Quinn watched her work with a quiet pride, never interrupting, always near. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, Galina stood at the window, her hands resting on the sill. "I used to think I had to earn peace," she said, "that I had to suffer enough to deserve it. And now, I think peace comes when you stop waiting for the world to make space for you and you carve it yourself instead." Quinn stepped behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "We carved it," she leaned back against him, "and it's ours." They stayed that way for a long while, watching the sky shift from gold to violet, the land folding itself into shadow. The goats settled in the barn. The creek sang low and steady. And inside the walls they had raised together, everything held, years past, marked not by hardship but by the slow shaping of a life. They built a second room, then a third. Neighbors came more often, some bringing children, others just seeking calm. Galina kept her herbs in labeled jars. Quinn's hands grew rougher, but his grip never faltered. They aged side by side, not in quiet retreat, but in the daily rhythm of shared purpose. They never left that land, never needed to. And the ones who knew them said it was the kind of love that didn't burn fast or loud, but deep and sure like roots growing beneath hard ground, steady enough to hold through any storm. And it did. Forever.